pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Hello, this is Point of View, and this is Nick Pitts, and this is August 30th, 2017. I'm joined at the round table today by Mr. Kerby Anderson. Kerby, how are you this week?
I'm good, and second to last day of August. Hard to believe.
Second to last day of August, also known as National Frankenstein Day. And I'm also joined at the round table by Miss Chelsey Youman. How are you today, Chelsey?
I am well. Good afternoon.
Oh, so good to be here with
Mary
you.
Shelley? Is that what we're talking about?
Mary Shelley. So apparently this
There
was
you
the
go.
day that it was Frankenstein was released, and so and I
First science fiction book, if you think about it, really.
Yeah, just
in many ways.
brilliant. And so it's also Roasted Marshmallow Day. So
I think
there we go.
You know, I've got to bring in something along those lines, especially food.
Yes.
And so obviously there's a lot to talk about today. We'll be talking about everything from Hurricane Harvey and the latest that's happening down there in the Houston area, especially as Harvey has made landfall again the second time earlier this morning, as well as we'll be talking about free speech and the canceling of free speech potentially out at UC Berkeley. So in Kerby's old stomping grounds, we'll be talking about the great stiletto scandal that happened yesterday. Watch out. I don't know if anybody's wearing stilettos. Kerby, are you wearing stilettos? I havenent seen your shoes today.
I am looking at Chelsea. So
I am guilty. I am guilty.
Okay, so I don't know if Chelsea's going into any danger zones, I guess you could say. And then we'll also be talking about Michael Cromartie and the passing of just that great man of the faith. And so, but first off, we'll talk about Harvey. And so just to give some updated statistics on what's happening down there, it's estimated between 25 and 30% of Harris County, which is the county seat being Houston, is covered and flooded right now. At least 22 people have been confirmed. More than 50 inches of rain has fallen that just continues to pour down, and it appears as though early this morning that Harvey again made landfall this morning.
You know, the other one that we mentioned yesterday, 20 trillion gallons of water coming down. Can you even get your head around that, or even hands around it, and realize how much is actually dumped on Houston and how long-term this is going to be as well?
That's right. I heard that it was the most amounts of rain, any storm in U.S. continental history.
It's so hard to even begin to fathom right now. And one of the things that's so interesting, or just so heartbreaking to even think about, is what differentiates this from, say, a Hurricane Katrina is, I don't know if you remember when Hurricane Katrina hit back in 2005, there was a time where there was a respite. It was rain, and then 2 days later, there was the gray skies. And I just remember the characteristic gray skies. Well, that's not the case in Houston right now, because it's still raining right now. Yeah. There was one picture that captivated me, as so many other pictures I'm sure that have captivated you all, of just even seeing I-10 yesterday. And so I-10 is completely flooded, and it's not just standing water, but it's just waves with white caps on the top. Just vicious rains that continue to pour down over there.
You know, one of the things we did yesterday is talk with somebody with Samaritan's Purse, and of course we've been encouraging people to give to that. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But I asked him, you know, how long do you think you'll be there? Because I figured we're talking years. And he said they had been at Katrina for 5 years. And so if you consider this to be equal to or worse than Katrina, those 5 trucks that we talked about going down there, as well as all the volunteers, 5 years from now, we still might be talking about some of the people there in Houston. Isn't that amazing?
That's unbelievable. Chelsey, I don't know about you, but I've been so encouraged by some of the press coverage that's happening down there. Just really seeing the goodness of America take place.
I think you're so right. I mean, Texans are definitely coming together unified, but so is our country as a whole. I know that there have been millions and millions of donations given. Shelters opening up. I am really encouraged. Actually, a personal story. One of my clients, Judge Mack, is a justice of the peace in Montgomery County. Part of his position is to be the county coroner, and so he started a chaplaincy program to help serve him in that capacity, people to come onto trauma scenes or death scenes. But he already had 30 churches in this chaplaincy program. When it was really hard to get in and difficult to get in and no one knew what to do. He was able to completely coordinate with all 30 of those churches built in who are providing aid and shelter now in Montgomery County to the surrounding areas. And so I think everyone's just really coming out in droves and unifying. And we have to overcome something like this.
You know, this is a good example that I've said before, that if you really want to understand America, don't look at Charlottesville, don't look at Berkeley, look at Houston. I mean, we have all sorts of individuals that I've run into, we've heard from, that just simply said, I've got a boat, I'm just heading down there. You know, we got the Cajun Navy showing up the other day, just unexpectedly. And so as good as it is that we have FEMA, we have the Red Cross, we have, of course, our good friends, Samaritan's Purse and others, there are just a lot of individuals that simply said, I'm not going to wait for the federal government, I'm not going to wait for the state government, I'm not going to wait for the National Guard to tell me what to do. I'm going to go out there and save some lives. And this is America at its best, don't you think?
I absolutely agree. There's one video that captivated me, Chelsey, and it was this 14-second clip of this man from Texas City, Texas. Probably the most original name ever from a Texas city. And so he's about to go. He's about to set off with his boat, and he's making the last-minute adjustments. And a TV reporter comes up to him and says, "What are you going to do?" And he just looks at the TV reporter and says, "I'm going to save some lives."
Yeah.
And then off he goes. It's just, again, we're just seeing the spirit of America, that what makes America so great, just this volunteerism characterize the place.
It's so true. I mean, I even know personal friends on Facebook who are saying, who has a boat? And someone else offers a boat. I have multiple friends down there now in a boat. And I'm praying for their safety right now. And I can't wait until we're able to all go down to the shelters and start really getting into some of these areas. The cleanup alone, I mean, this is a long game, as Kerby mentioned. This is going to take months and months and months. I think they're saying there's 30,000 estimated that will be displaced from their homes just in the Houston area.
Tell your story about the man that went down there, parked his truck, and then went out in the boat.
Yeah, so yesterday I was talking to a friend, and so a friend of a friend, rather, and they were sharing the story about how he went out. He was one of those individuals that went out and just wanted to travel down from Dallas, came down to Houston to be able to help out. And so he sets out on his boat, and he's going and rescuing people and really helping out in whatever way that he can. And so as he's coming back towards the end of the day, he goes back to the place where he thinks his truck is, but unfortunately his truck had been washed away. And so there's still rain that's coming down. There's levees that I think there were 2 levees that broke yesterday. Right. Mm-hmm. The dams are just overflowing right now. We're just beginning to see that this is still very much an active scene right now. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to be very interesting. But one of the things I'm so encouraged by, but also one of the things I'm just so heartbroken by, is something you touched on, Chelsey, is the sense that people are using social media right now to be able to reach out to people. That I've read one statistic that there were upwards of 56,000 911 calls that have been made since this thing started. Upwards of anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 that were coming in initially. There's just so much of a need right now in this community. And
the amazing thing about that, though, is the first responders, they said that they've gotten to all but 500 of those calls. Wow. Can you imagine the immense amount of effort that's going underway to be able to respond to 50,000 phone calls in a matter of days? I'm just relieved. I'm relieved for the area. I know that it's difficult and people have lost everything, but I think that there's an attempt to be very well organized underway and to reach as many people as possible.
Yeah, I think the rescue efforts, there were around 3,500 rescue efforts by government officials, according to their count. But that's not even counting the Cajun navies. That's not counting some of these other altruistic citizens that have really gone out and done it on their own. And it's so encouraged by social media. This Facebook, where I usually just post pictures of food and myself, is really turning into this really rescue effort that's really for the benefit. We'd love to hear from you. And so if you have a comment or call, you can call in at 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212. And when we come back, we'll continue to talk about some of the effects that are happening, but also some of the good stories that are happening down in Houston. And we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In a recent column, Victor Davis Hanson referred to the Silicon Valley billionaires as the new robber barons. The term was used in the 19th century to describe those millionaires who used their monopolies to crush competitors and to rig markets and even corrupt politicians and government. That's a pretty strong term to use against these high-tech personalities and companies, but let's look at his arguments. He reminds us that President Obama attacked Mitt Romney as a potential outsourcer-in-chief for investing in companies that went overseas. Yet most of the computers and smartphones sold by Silicon Valley companies are still being built abroad. He says that progressives demand higher taxes on the wealthy. They traditionally argue that tax gimmicks and loopholes are threats to the republic. But just a few seem to care that the Silicon Valley companies of Amazon, Apple, Google, and Starbucks filter hundreds of billions of dollars of global profits through tax havens and various tax shelters. It's worth mentioning that the riches of these Silicon Valley multi-billionaires dwarf the wealth of the original robber barons. Yet they also accumulated their vast wealth by using monopolies and finding ways to stifle competition. Facebook, with 2 billion monthly global users, has effectively cornered the social media market. Amazon, he says, is America's new octopus. Its growing tentacles reach into nearly every area of our lives. That is why he's asking where we might find muckrakers today who are in the spirit of Upton Sinclair, Frank Norris, and Lincoln Steffens. Maybe one reason they get a pass is due to the fact that the Silicon Valley elite are overwhelmingly liberal and give over 90% of their donations to Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Perhaps that's why few criticize these 21st century robber barons. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Sony Pictures, All Saints, the inspiring story of Pastor Michael Spurlock with John Corbett, now playing rated PG, allsaintsmovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back. I'm joined at the round table by Mr. Kerby Anderson, Miss Chelsey Youman, and we have been talking about Hurricane Harvey right now, and and just some of the effects that are happening at Harvey. And Hurricane Harvey, unfortunately, is not immune to fake news either.
Here we go.
I must admit, okay, so I send out this thing called the Daily Briefing, and so I try to encompass a lot of what's happening in the news and try to do it in a succinct manner with a biblical perspective. And so I shared yesterday this picture about with a flooded interstate, and there was a shark. Visible in the water. Unfortunately, I rail against fake news, but I became fake news. I got punked. I was waiting for Ashton Kutcher to come out.
And as your gullible reader, that is something I would forward to everyone I know.
Yes, because after all, it passed the Nick Pitts test, so obviously it's true.
So I blamed it on lack of sleep, is what I ended up doing. And so I put this thing together in the morning, and I saw that, and I was like, this is unbelievable. There's a shark on the interstate. It's like Sharknado, but it is not to be. So I had to apologize and issue a correction earlier today. But what is not fake news, though, is there is an alligator farm. I guess it's like this alligator farm right outside of Houston, which again is just it's
gators.
It's funny to a certain extent, but it's also kind of scary to another extent. There's this gator farm that right outside of Houston that the waters are continuing to rise, and as the waters rise, 350 alligators have the ability to be able to swim over this now. And
it's my understanding they are issuing warnings for alligators, floating fire ants, E. coli now, and snakes. So welcome to Texas.
Yeah.
It's an apocalypse.
It is something else. And so what we continue to see, though, is just these effects. And so, Kerby, one of the things I'd be really interested in hearing from you is kind of the biblical understanding of this. Like, how are we to be able to account for just this evil that seems to be happening, but be able to see kind of the goodness that's happening for this? Why would God allow something like this to happen?
You know, your boss did a very good job today of talking about some of the reasons why we should not try to read into this. One of our articles here is, did Texas deserve the hurricane? First of all, it was kind of intriguing because somebody was saying, well, if they deserve it for voting for Donald Trump, Harris County actually is a pretty blue county, so it didn't vote for it. But, you know, there's a tendency to say, well, this is God's judgment or whatever. Let's just recognize there's evil in the world for two different reasons. First of all, moral evil, and that's because we are sinners and individuals can make free moral choices, and those can be very evil choices. But this is the different category, what we call physical evil. We live in a fallen world, and because we live in a fallen world, there are earthquakes, there are tornadoes, there are hurricanes. Now, there may be some reasons for that. I think some people are trying to draw this into climate change and all the rest, but I think really what it is that we've not had too many situations in which a hurricane has come in or a tropical storm has come in and it just stayed there. Because of the way in which the various high pressure areas were, it just simply did not move. So it's sucking up all sorts of moisture and then dumping it down, 20 trillion gallons worth, by the way. And you add to that Houston, which in the past didn't have as much pavement, so some of that might have soaked into the ground. Compared to, say, the 1935 floods in Houston, we have a lot more possibility for flooding. And so there you go. And if you try to read into that anything else and say this is God's judgment or this is God's penalty or this is an example of God warning America, just as a few people tried to during the eclipse that all of us had a chance to see recently, then I think you're really going far beyond what I think we could look at from a biblical point of view.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of the things that I'm just so captivated by what Dr. Denison articulates, Chelsey, is this a phrase that God redeems all that he allows. It's the sense that we have a God that's big enough, according to Genesis 50:20, that even if what man means for evil, God can use for good. And I think that's one of the things I'm so encouraged by. It just seems so much bad is happening in Houston, but even in the midst of the bad, we're seeing these instances of goodness and grace that are littering all throughout Houston.
That's right. And the Bible says, take heart, or in this world we have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And so we just hold on to the promises that our hope is not in this world as Christians. And yes, we know that there are going to be difficult times and enduring times, but the goal is to glorify God in our response and all that we do. And I think that he will be glorified by so many of the stories and relationships and things that we're going to see in the next upcoming years, even as we rebuild our state.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of the things that I was doing a quiet time earlier this week, and I was captivated by Psalm 77. And so in Psalm 77, you see in verse 16, there's this instance that says that that even in God's presence, the waters tremble. And so how contradictory, I guess the reciprocal of that, because right now we're trembling because the waters are so uncertain and the waters are just ever looming within Houston. But even our God, it causes the waters to be able to tremble at his presence and to know that we might not be able to see the hand of God during these times. We can also trust his heart.
I think so. I just alluded to the fact that there are some people that are trying to politicize this statement, and it is unfortunate, as we have talked about so many times, that everything has become political now. Even something as simple as a hurricane or a tornado or an earthquake or a free speech rally or whatever it might be. And I think if nothing else, there is a time for us to say, can we just step back and do the right thing, step back and wait for the analysis later on? But that seems to be almost impossible in this culture, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that was epitomized yesterday, Chelsey, if you remember. So President Trump went down. President Trump was joined by Miss Trump down in Houston. I guess he was right outside of Houston, right outside of the Houston area, did a stop and just be able to visit the disaster relief workers. And many people commented on the fact that when Miss Trump was making her way to the aircraft, rather, in D.C., she was wearing stilettos. And they were, I guess a couple of people had opinions on stilettos now.
Yes, surprise, surprise. Vogue had an opinion about the stilettos, and even, I believe, used a phrase along the lines of disaster wear, and I thought, as someone who used to subscribe to Vogue, I cannot anymore. First of all, it's vapid, but second of all, what is more vapid than discussing the appropriate clothing items of someone who's on their way getting on a plane to go to disaster relief. I mean, could we have any more of a sideshow? And it's, I think, completely out of touch with reality. You know, the reason the left, not to politicize this, but the reason the left lost this election was because of this outlandish, out of touch opinions that they have. Let's talk about the real issues. Let's talk about the Americans that are hurting in Houston and the relief they're providing, and the rest is a sideshow.
I couldn't agree more. It's, you know, it's just so funny, Kerby. I just think that what we're seeing down in Houston right now is there is tragedy, but we're seeing so many instances of goodness, but then we're trying to insert politics in it, which is just so frustrating to me right now.
The other part of that is just the inappropriateness of some of this. I think there were a lot of people cheering the other day when you had a CNN reporter coming up to this woman who's trying to literally dry her kids off, has probably not eaten in 2 days, and stick a microphone in her face, and she just cuts loose on them and says, "You're sticking a microphone in my face while I'm still trying to dry off my kids, and we've been through," and knowing full well that the CNN reporter in about 2 minutes is going to go behind the curtain there, get their sandwich, their Coke, their water, and everything like that. And so it just, I think there is a sense in which the American people are starting to say, whether it's politicians or some people in the mainstream media, we have just had it. We want to go out there and minister to and help people that are actually in distress right now, and we don't want to hear about anything else other than how we can do what we can do to help these individuals.
I think one of the things. Oh, go ahead, Chelsey.
I was going to just say that in my mind, this truly discredits the left. I mean, that the Trumps can do no right, and even the CNN head White House correspondents came back and said, "I didn't see any emotion in Trump. I didn't see that he had empathy when looking at these survivors." And you cannot go to Houston right now or the Houston area, Galveston area, and not feel a sense of empathy. But he is our commander in chief, and he is there doing his duty and began working with our governor last week to get ahead of this. So it just looks so petty, and they're discrediting themselves.
Yeah, I think Axios did a really good job when they were kind of documenting it, because they had an insider source that continued to, it indicates that Donald Trump very much could relate with this, because as someone that owns apartment buildings in New York, he was experiencing with flooding. And he was talking about how interested Trump was
Hurricane
in the
Sandy and all the things he went through.
And interested in the flooding. And what I think is just so appropriate, and what it takes heart in, is when I was sitting back and I was thinking through everything that was happening, I was reminded that probably around 20 to 30 million Americans are watching cable news, are really giving their all to politics. But there's 321 million Americans. So that's a small percentage that are concerned about the politics of it. And there's a much larger percentage that are wanting to get their hands dirty.
Yes. Well, again, we've got to take a break, but let me just mention, in case you have not responded, that one of the things we have encouraged you to do is visit our website. Some of you have said, what can we do? And one of the things we did want to provide for you is a way that you could give to Samaritan's Purse. 100% of your gift will go to Samaritan's Purse. That's, of course, the organization run by Franklin Graham. Simply go to pointofview.net. Or, of course, we also have a text to donate option. All you need to do is text POV to 76959. 76959. We sent out an email about that. Some of you have responded, but if some of you would like to do so, we've made that available on our website, pointofview.net. And we'll be right back.
From Affirm Films and Provident Films, who brought you War Room, comes All Saints. New pastor Michael Spurlock, his struggling congregation, and a group of refugees come together, trusting God as they plant seeds for a future that might just save them all.
Start a farm, we work together, we save the church.
All Saints, starring John Corbett. Now playing. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at allsaintsmovie.com.
Point of View Radio wants to fuel change in our culture, but we need your help to do it. And I use the word need very intentionally. I worked with a well-known radio ministry for 29 years, a program that helped a lot of people. They got saved, they got elected to Congress. It produced a lot of good. But people started thinking that someone else would give, and that program isn't here anymore. Your gift today can make sure that doesn't happen to Point of View. Visit pointofview.net and click the banner Change Happens With You, or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And we are back, and I am Nick Pitts hosting today, and I'm joined at the round table by Mr. Kerby Anderson and Ms. Chelsey Youman, and we've been talking about Hurricane Harvey and just kind of some of the devastating effects, and we've been also taking some of your phone calls. And so if you want to come in, call in and add your opinion or your point of view, or maybe have a question, you can call in at 800-351-1212. And we're going to take one of those phone calls. We've got Cliff in New Mexico right now. Cliff, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, great to hear from you, Cliff. What are you thinking right now?
You too. Well, I am so shocked at what's going on in a way, but then and as a blind pastor of a Calvary Chapel, as assistant blind pastor, I went through Matthew 24, and I went through it 3 times last night, and I tell you, it really speaks on what's going on. But we also feel for those who are not believers that need to be, and I'm hoping that through my heart and through the prayer of God, that these people would get reached to understand that God loves them too. Even though they may not be believers, God still loves them. He doesn't turn nobody away. And I'm hoping that we get so many people that can reach to those that are still lost in this or confused of why it happened. But God also talks about things that are like birth pains. And I think this is one of the birth pains that we're starting to feel is one of those things. And we're not just going to hear it, feeling it all over the world. There's fires going on everywhere around the world, like North Korea and what's going on with them. And you hear all these things going on, and you think, God, we're surrounded by things around us that we can't get out of. We're in the middle of it, so we need to be helping while we're in the middle of it. And that's my prayer, is get so many people to help and pray to come together in unity and one, to be able to understand that God is in control, and he still is. Even though we don't think he is, his hand is still on everything we do on this planet and what we do in life.
That's great comments, Cliff. Kerby, I think Cliff is onto something really big in the sense that this is a great opportunity for the church right now.
It certainly is. One of the reasons we wanted to highlight Samaritan's Purse, not that you couldn't give to Red Cross or United Way or anything else, is that they have so many volunteers, and we talked about yesterday, those volunteers meet these people face to face. Well, first of all, they meet their physical needs. You know, you need insulin because you're diabetic. Okay, you need food, you need clothing, you need shelter, you need just some hot coffee, you need a rest. But then as they meet the physical needs, they can also then begin to meet the spiritual needs. And we all know that sometimes the only time somebody looks up is when they hit bottom. And some of these people are at the very end of their circumstances where they may, in many cases, have lost everything. And there's where you really need an eternal perspective. So I really encourage those individuals, whether it's with Samaritan's Purse, whether it's various churches, and I know there are a lot of churches sending vans down and things like that. We recognize from missions work that as soon as you can feed hungry stomachs, then you can begin to feed hungry hearts.
I couldn't agree more. Chelsey, one of the videos, again, I think I just have seen, I've been so captivated by these videos that are coming out of individuals that are reaching out and are helping, and then 2, the power of the testimony that's been all throughout. There's one video, for instance, of an individual that's walking with his child that just has crawled out of a window with his child, got on a boat, swam apart to be able to get to this land. And as they're walking on the land, walking towards the camera, there's a reporter that's asking questions and is asking, and he said, "God did it. God did it. God got me through it." And it's just giving praise to God, even though there's these dire circumstances right now. Even though, again, I can't stress enough, this is tragic circumstances, but we're seeing so much goodness that's coming out of this.
That's right. I mean, we know that the church has always historically grown and flourished after times of tribulation. And I think that even though this is maybe a different type of tribulation than that, we can't hide the light that we have as believers. And these are our brothers and sisters. Whether they're in Christ or not, they are brothers and sisters. And so it allows the church to really be the church and show up. And I think it's so important that everyone be very proactive in being a part of that, no matter what distance there is between you and the state of Texas. There are so many ways, as Kerby mentioned, to donate and be a part of this and be a part of a solution.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Jesus. And so when you read through the Gospels specifically and you see Jesus healing the blind man, there's 5 different ways that he healed the blind man. There's so many opportunities and so many different avenues by which we can share the good news of Jesus. I would never recommend spitting in someone's eye. Don't get me wrong.
You can try.
I don't want to.
Call in, let us know how it goes.
Yeah. And so, but I will say that there's grand opportunities. One opportunity, and we'll jump back on the to phone calls. One opportunity that I saw was just so captivated by this is Dallas Baptist University, which is here in Dallas. They hosted their chapel on Monday, and there were 1,700 people in the chapel. And they had, at the very beginning of the chapel, they asked students that were affected by Harvey because their families or close relatives were down in Houston to stand up. Upwards of 200 students in that 1,700 room chapel stood up. And then all the other students began circling around and praying for these students, but didn't just pray for them and their families, but also were willing to give. And so within 2 days, Dallas college students, poor college students, the 1,700 that were there ended up giving at least 11,000 by account last night. There's just this tremendous generosity that's outpouring, not just at Dallas Baptist University, but across the country right now. That's just really another instance of we are more than white supremacists. We are more than Antifa. We are so much more than divided by our politics, but really united towards this common goal. This experiment called America. And so we're going to continue to take some phone calls, and we'll head over to Scott right now. Scott, are you there?
Yes, thank you for taking the call. I wanted to make a comment about the whole issue of judgment of God. It is the judgment of God, but it is in a different way. It's part of the original sin. You know, he set the world up to be a Garden of Eden, so to speak, and the original sin cast us into this turmoil. Now, the question then becomes, when these things happen, like the hurricanes, and interestingly enough, I actually do forensic engineering for insurance companies, so I see this stuff all the time. The two things that you have to look at is, okay, you have a response that's needed. What is that response? Well, interesting, the charitynavigator.com website did an assessment of charities, and they found that Samaritan's Purse and Convoy of Hope were some of the top 5 charities in terms of how much percentage of their money that comes in goes directly to helping the needy, which I thought that was interesting. We obviously know that the Baptists and the Catholic charities, and there's so many other Christian charities that do help in this circumstance. But then you also have the secular side of it, obviously the federal government, the state and local governments. You know, what is their response? And what I found interesting about that was, and this is not anything political at all, so please don't take it that way. When Donald Trump went down there, there was a little bit of criticism about how he responded, but I think there's a misunderstanding of how he responds, because this is a guy that spent years with boots on the ground, so to speak, in his construction projects. So he's a boots on the ground kind of person. And then also he's a good salesman and a good cheerleader. And I think what he did is he went down there to cheer on the secular response, sort of as a cheerleader. And so we have the Christian response, we have the governmental or secular response. And overall, I think what you're seeing is exactly what you said, the experiment of America, and how you respond in a crisis like this. This is a great example of it.
I completely agree, Scott. And to kind of touch on that Donald Trump piece, it's just important for us to remember that context is king. And for the vast majority of Mr. Trump's life, President Trump's life, rather, he's been a businessman. Yeah. And businessmen are trying to compel, they're trying to generate interest. And he really was. Scott, you bring up a great point. He was really cheerleading these groups right now. I don't know about you, but I felt a sense of pride. I've only been in Texas I've been in Texas for 10 years, which is crazy to think about. Crazy to think about. But there was a little bit of Texas pride when he's like, Texas, they can handle it. I was like, heck yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Censored,
Texas,
of course.
Yeah, Texas can help other Texans. You know, and again, some people were saying, well, he wasn't hugging, you know. Well, he's not the hugger in chief, never has been, never will be. So that's the first thing that you need to recognize. But he wasn't there to be there. He was there like the commander in chief, if you will, to begin to make sure that FEMA and the federal government and the state government were all working together. And that was his role, and didn't really see that as being empathetic as much as let's just get this fixed and let's get these people the money that they need, and let's get all the kind of repairs necessary so that people can get back to normal. And that's kind of his mindset. I think we should applaud that rather than criticize it.
I completely agree. And so when we come back after the long break, we're going to continue to talk about, we'll continue to take calls about Hurricane Harvey or anything else that you might like to discuss. You can call in at 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212. But also when we come back after the break, we're going to be talking about what's happening at UC Berkeley.
Oh, boy.
And apparently the spirit of Kerby and his partiness is beginning to be revived yet again there, and the sense that they're trying to squelch free speech. But this isn't just rioters, but this is coming from the mayor as well. And so we'll be talking about that when we come back from the break. And so we'll hear back from you here in a few seconds.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. They were sick of a commercialized Christmas. The presents and general distraction from what they believed to be a season meant to remind us of something deeper led Larry Gallo and his family to look for something different. So they left behind the packages and bows to serve the less fortunate in Central America. Larry's girls are physician's assistants, so it was natural for them to take on a medical missions role. Larry, a maintenance engineer, discovered that the kids in line needed some company. So as his daughters provided the medicine, Larry kept the kids happy. So what's the problem? Well, Larry Gallo is better known as Sergeant Larry Gallo. When the U.S. Air Force featured Gallo's story in one of their publications, an atheist group said the article violated the First Amendment. They even alleged that Gallo's story, quote, emboldens our Islamic enemies because we look like crusaders and it enrages our Islamic allies, unquote. They wanted the article taken down. After a quick internet search recently, I discovered that the article in question is still active on an Air Force website, and it should be. The Air Force should never cave to demands of censoring religion from public view. It should never punish those service members who put service over self, even outside the line of duty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Could you lose your career because of your faith? Could your pastor be sued because of his sermons? Can students and teachers be punished because of what they believe about God or what they say? Can the government or even your employer force you to violate your beliefs? Get the answers, and if necessary, legal protection from First Liberty Institutes at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I'm joined by Kerby Anderson and Chelsey Youman around the round table. And so we're going to transition from Hurricane Harvey to talking about Berkeley. And I just can't, as soon as I saw Berkeley, I just thought, Kerby, what have you done now?
What have I done? What have I done? You know, first of all, we got to recognize that there is, and the lawyer will appreciate this in the room, the heckler's veto. And this is something that has become a real concern because it is the threat now of violence that is enough to shut down free speech. And so this is the concern. People starting to say, if I even think that something is going to go the wrong direction, I'm going to close down the Rose Parade in Portland, or I'm going to close down the Free Speech Week at the University of California at Berkeley. And Chelsey, you're well aware of, you've heard of the idea of the heckler's veto, where it just simply says that an individual by himself or herself can close down an opportunity simply because they're going to heckle, or in this case, disrupt a particular event.
That's right. I mean, obviously, a lot of us here would think it's a cop-out, frankly, to not have to deal with the conservative individuals and speeches that would be otherwise going on. But I think it looks like a breakdown of rule of law. I mean, frankly, the most disconcerting part of all of it to me is the fact that our rule of law, our law enforcement officials, our governing officials in the cities, the mayors, are acquiescing to, frankly, terrorist threats and threats of violence. And I think that we're in a civilized country, a democratic country with a rule of law that needs to be respected. And I read a quote that said, in many ways, Antifa's contribution to the schism through its use of political violence and intimidating tactics means it runs the risk of turning itself into the entity it claims to resist. fascism.
There you go. You know, the other day we played, matter of fact, it was yesterday, my commentary was the one where we quoted from the former senator from Missouri, Jim Talent, and he put together all sorts of things that need to happen. And Nick and Chelsey, one of the things he said is that he was really concerned that a number of governors and especially mayors don't want to enforce the law because they are convinced that they would suffer political consequences if they enforce the law against members of politically favored groups. And so that is understandable. You may want to be a little more hesitant if it's a rally for Black Lives Matter. But when you know that Antifa is going to go and beat up people from the alt-right, and you still step back, as happened last time in Berkeley, and people are getting hurt, getting concussions, going to the hospital, this is where you have to either have the mayor or the governor or somebody step in. We lose the rule of law. You essentially have a national heckler's veto, which says anytime I threaten violence, we won't have a rally, we won't have free speech, and we'll lose all sorts of opportunities for us to express our opinions.
So is there, Chelsey, help me understand the concept, I guess you could say, of free speech, because I know that we don't have just unlimited free speech, correct?
Right.
Like, I can't go into a theater and say fire. That's not, I can't properly use my free speech there. Can you help me better understand free speech?
Sure. I actually am dealing with this on a case of mine, so it's very relevant to my knowledge right now, my recent research. But there are a few exceptions to our First Amendment right to free speech, which I thought was why South Carolina, we needed to be talking about that at the time too. So this applies to the alt-right and the far left equally. We've got Nazis on one side and the anti-Nazis on the other. So, but the issue being the limit extends when an individual is personally threatening someone else. There's a limit, or what they call incitement, when you're specifically inciting violence. And so it's going to be a specific instance. I do think South Carolina, we might have had some exceptions there to the neo-Nazis' right to free speech when it comes to personally antagonizing and attacking someone else. Look, we're all humans, and the Supreme Court has recognized in the past that human nature can only be pushed so far. And so if you're being personally threatened to the extent that you feel like you're being physically threatened and you respond in violence, it's a self-defense mechanism. There, it's a very narrow line of cases, but it does exist. So there are limits here to the antagonistic and violent threats and harassment that can occur.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I look back, Kerby, I look over, Charlottesville is very different than what's happening at UC Berkeley right now.
Yes.
But if we look back at Charlottesville, I don't know about you, but I just thought, I don't represent any of these groups right now. I'm not anti-fascist. Like, I'm not Antifa. I'm not one of them, because I'm not going to try to squelch people's speech with my utilization of speech and then my violence. I know I'm taking boxing classes right now, but I'm not that strong. I'm the least aggressive boxer.
You would be first to go.
I'm the least aggressive boxer in that boxing class, nevertheless. But then I also know that I'm not a neo-Nazi.
I don't like either of them.
I'm not a white supremacist. And so I think, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I think a lot of Americans just feel alienated right now.
They certainly do. And this has been the problem sometimes, even the way the media covers it. You've seen this before, where they get somebody on one extreme side and one on the other extreme side, and Middle America goes, I can't relate to either of these individuals because of the extreme views that they have. And this is why, in some respects, you do almost have an indifference, because a lot of people say, I can't relate to either side. This is not even one that I want to take sides on, because I would like to get rid of both of those extremes from my life. You know, you raised a question, of course, about whether or not you could yell fire in a theater. Nancy Pelosi the other day said you can't yell wolf in a crowded theater either. I don't know if you saw that one, but I think you could say wolf in a crowded theater.
I'm trying to think who let the dogs out there. Like, so who are we going to find out who let the dogs? No, we're not doing that.
No. But again, back to your point, I just had to get that in. It just was one of the funniest lines from one of the interviews the other day. But back to the point, there is a real problem in our society right now, because sometimes we find ourselves in the middle, and it's kind of like we have one group on one side and they're shooting these missiles over and they're landing on this side, and this group over here shooting missiles over on the other side, and everybody's just watching the missiles go back and forth, but they have no relevance to my day-to-day life. And this is why I think, again, this will be a real interesting congressional campaign, because I think the candidates that can say, you know, we're tired of all this extreme violence, hate. We're tired of all the noise. We want to just get back to making your life better. And those are the people I think are going to win in the next election, because there are so many Americans that have just had it with all the things that have been taking place over the last couple of months.
I think about some of the stuff that's happening, Chelsey, just even within town halls right now, because you have a lot of members of Congress out on recess right now, and so they're back in their home communities, and they're not even hosting these town halls and community meetings because the violence and
That's
the propensity of violence.
Heckler's veto. There you go.
And so we're just, how are we supposed to engage with our elected officials right now if they're not going to be able to, if they can't even show up because of fear of violence? Something like Steve Scalise might happen again.
Yeah, it's a breakdown that I haven't really witnessed in my recollection that I've seen in our law enforcement community. It's obviously free speech. The whole purpose of the First Amendment is to protect viewpoints that are in the public interest and our ability to talk to our elected officials and to express our political views. And so the fact that all of that's being hampered, I think, goes directly to the heart of the First Amendment protections that the founders had in mind. We have a duty, as those of us who are more central than neo-Nazis on one side and the Antifa on the other, we have a duty to show up and continue the dialogue and to exercise our free rights and to petition our elected officials to protect our ability to do that. I mean, that is what we can do, is to continue to be engaged, to show up to the polls and vote in elected officials who respect and will commit to protecting your rights.
Yeah, I completely agree that we just need to have individuals that are standing up and that aren't giving in to the extremes on either the right or the left. And it's not necessarily saying that we all have to agree with one another. We just don't have to demonize one another.
We can agree they're crazy together.
Yeah, that's true.
We can all agree they're crazy. But the other thing I think to note, too, is both sides of this equation, both extremes, they thrive on this violence and the negative attention they're getting from it. I mean, that's part of their notoriety. They wear it as a badge of honor. And so I just wish as a society we could just shut this down. And I think our law enforcement officers, they have that duty to do that.
Yeah. And when we come back after the break, we're going to continue to talk about Berkeley. Specifically, there's an instance where Ben Shapiro, who's the conservative commentator, is going to be going out to UC Berkeley, and they're charging him outrageous fees relative to security right now. They're also doing other instances, and they haven't even opened up the sign-up page, even though it's happening here in a few weeks. And so we're going to continue to see, is it wise for Ben Shapiro and the threat of violence to be able to go out there? We'll be talking about that and so much more after this break, and we'll see you back here.
At dinner recently, I was struck by the couple in front of me. They were allegedly spending a night out together, but the only time they communicated in a half hour was one time when the man showed what was on his phone to the woman, and then back to their own screens. We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You'll find us online with your phone, your tablet, your laptop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues. You can also follow our new YouTube video series, Uncensored. Stay informed. Follow us on Twitter at Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Again, at Point of View RTS. We'd love you to retweet us, to share our Facebook posts, but please don't do it when you're out with your family or someone you love. We can wait. We're online 24 hours a day. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I'm constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on, and if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, and I am joined at the round table by Mr. Kerby Anderson and Miss Chelsey Youman. And welcome. It's August 30th, 2017, also known as Roasted Marshmallow Day.
There we go.
So this is the big question that I have right now. And I know, Chelsey, you're very nervous right now because I'm about to ask this question. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Dark chocolate or regular chocolate with your roasted marshmallow?
Dark chocolate all the way.
Dark chocolate,
But really anything with a marshmallow. I don't have a lot of standards.
Kerby?
Yeah, that's good for s'mores, don't you think?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's where we normally roast them. They put some graham cracker and some chocolate, and dark chocolate sounds pretty good to me, and just pull them out there, and then you got your s'more.
You guys are
love
so
the s'mores?
healthy. You guys are so healthy with your dark chocolate.
Yeah, that is supposed to be better for you.
I didn't know that.
Yes,
yeah,
it
it's
is.
like super healthy for you.
Little
I
less
guess.
guilty.
Yeah, got the antioxidants in that
then I'm
milk
thinking
chocolate
about-
does not.
And I'm thinking about it too. Are you the type of person that when you go to a bonfire that you light your marshmallow on fire, or do you just like it lightly brown?
You know, I'm a burnt to the crisp person, but it's because I'm not very good at cooking.
Oh my goodness, I can't do it, Kerby. When I see a marshmallow that's
When they
going
get
up
that
in
black,
flames,
they start going, I don't know.
Yeah,
Those
it's just
black goes for the
carcinogens still
chocolate.
taste good.
Chocolate is black, but marshmallows are brown or white.
I'm the type of guy that just likes to light crisp, but then again, that's how I like my toast too. Like toast cannot be too. I like it just like a little bit warm. But speaking of toast, we're going to talk about Berkeley. Right?
Oh,
Is that an easy transition right now?
What a segue he's got.
Not really. So in the first hour, we talked about everything from Hurricane Harvey and just kind of the tragedy that continues to unfold, but the goodness that we're seeing out of the tragedy and some of the humanitarian efforts that's both from the government perspective, but also just from ordinary citizens. And then we started talking about towards the latter part of the earlier hour, we were talking about free speech, and specifically Free Speech Week that's happening in Berkeley, California right now, or that will be happening. And the mayor has questioned whether they need to be happening it. And so we're also opening up to phone calls. And so we're going to take one of those phone calls right now. We've got Jim from Oklahoma right now. Jim, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Jim, what is your point of view? What's your question?
Well, I have a couple of things. One is a little carryover from last Friday when you were talking about, free speech, particularly on Facebook, Twitter, things like that. Question in the back of my mind has been, why doesn't a Christian organization set up one of these social network things? I don't say that we abandon the world. God said we should be in the world, but not of the world. But why is it terribly expensive? Or, Steve Jobs started in his garage.
There was a group that Jim Paris talked about that was kind of a Christian alternative to Facebook. I don't know that it got very far, but I do believe that if the trend continues, maybe there will be a market segment there for that. As we pointed out on Friday, we're just talking about the fact that when you've got 2 billion people in Facebook, essentially Facebook has cornered the social media marketplace. And as a result, then when Facebook starts saying, I'm not sure I want to let you actually have your particular position there, or we're going to no longer support you, or you won't get support from Apple or Facebook or Google or whatever it might be, that's where you start running into some of the difficulties. And we brought that up as an issue, and that's why I think, Jim, you were talking about the idea that maybe we should think about a Christian Facebook. And I knew one that existed for a while, but I don't know that it's around anymore. But if we find out more, I'll let you know.
Okay, now we'll go to Berkeley. Does give them the axe? Ring any bells? I went to Cal Berkeley in the early 60s, and we had the four-letter speech movement and,
Mario
all those
Savio.
things.
Yeah.
But when Cal and Stanford got together, that was their chant. They had an axe that whoever won that year got to keep the axe for the next year or whatever. But Berkeley back then was, was a very good university, very prestigious and all that, but they basically ruined it. I never forget, this was ban the bomb time. And so if the networks over in San Francisco didn't have too much doing, they would come over to Berkeley. And I've seen them handing out the van pulls up, and all these kids are out there, long hair and all this kind of stuff. They hand out the signs, ban the bomb, and all this kind of stuff. I didn't actually see any money chasing hands, but that's just indicative of how far down the road Berkeley has gone. I'm a little bit ashamed to say that I'm an alumni, but
prestigious university. Gary Bauer pointed out the other day, if you look at the video, maybe you should post that on your video for the protesters. They were saying, no Trump, no wall, but they were also saying no USA at all. That was their chant. So you're really talking about an anarchist kind of philosophy. Anarchy, we don't want anything. These are the same individuals that go to the World Trade Organizations and protest. And these are individuals that are not just against fascist groups. They're really against the United States. And they, in some respects, have been referred to as the stormtroopers that are going against all sorts of different aspects of what we think makes America great.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's probably really, it is very discouraging for me. There's just a lot of critics today. I think at the end of the day, we have our free speech ability to be able to voice our criticism, but we also have the free speech ability to be able to offer up solutions right now. And we have a great many people that are very content with offering up criticisms, but not that many people that are willing to bring up solutions. Because at the end of the day, we're contingent. We recognize that we're on this march towards a more perfect union that we've been on since 1776. And as we're trying to create this more perfect union, yes, we've got a lot of individuals that are wanting to point out our problems, but we also have an opportunity for a lot of individuals to be able to offer up solutions as well.
Right. I mean, we're a civilized democracy here. I mean, we can have a dialogue, and we shouldn't be afraid of a dialogue. And I think that that's always my biggest criticism of the left, and now the far left that's come out of the woodwork in the past few months, is what is the fear in allowing someone to speak? Mm-hmm. What is the fear in hearing ideas you're opposed to and grappling with them and understanding the truths and the facts behind them and reaching a consensus? I mean, that's part of being a part of the civilized society that we've agreed to be in, and we continue to live here. And so I think this anarchist movement that's come out of the woodwork, they're really, the problem is I think they're winning in some of these places. When the mayors are stepping down and saying we can't defend our own city against them, it proves that government in these locations are very weak. But I also think it's something to say that they're in a lot of Democrat locations where Californians, I should say, we have the hardest time defending constitutional rights out of violations out of California, because the people of California consistently have voted those rights away. And so they're really, really, California, Oregon, and Washington, we have the hardest time. They're have the most limited First Amendment rights in our entire country.
That's fascinating. And so we would love to hear some of your comments, your opinions, and some of your questions that you might have relative to Berkeley or relative to the free speech movement, or maybe the squelching of that movement. And you can call in at 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212. When we come back after the break, we're going to continue to talk about some of these things. I'm really interested, Kerby, in just the two different type of responses right now relative to kind of specifically Ben Shapiro going, and just any individual that's going to go into Berkeley. One, they have the constitutional right to be able to give their free speech and to be able to exercise that. But from a Christian perspective, is it wise to be able to do that, especially when you know that you're going to bring about certain harm and terror? And so we're going to talk about some of that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In a recent column, Victor Davis Hanson referred to the Silicon Valley billionaires as the new robber barons. The term was used in the 19th century to describe those millionaires who used their monopolies to crush competitors and to rig markets and even corrupt politicians and government. That's a pretty strong term to use against these high-tech personalities and companies, but let's look at his arguments. He reminds us that President Obama attacked Mitt Romney as a potential outsourcer-in-chief for investing in companies that went overseas. Yet most of the computers and smartphones sold by Silicon Valley companies are still being built abroad. He says that progressives demand higher taxes on the wealthy. They traditionally argue that tax gimmicks and loopholes are threats to the republic. But just a few seem to care that the Silicon Valley companies of Amazon, Apple, Google, and Starbucks filter hundreds of billions of dollars of global profits through tax havens and various tax shelters. It's worth mentioning that the riches of these Silicon Valley multi-billionaires dwarf the wealth of the original robber barons. Yet they also accumulated their vast wealth by using monopolies and finding ways to stifle competition. Facebook, with 2 billion monthly global users, has effectively cornered the social media market. Amazon, he says, is America's new octopus. Its growing tentacles reach into nearly every area of our lives. That is why he's asking where we might find muckrakers today who are in the spirit of Upton Sinclair, Frank Norris, and Lincoln Steffens. Maybe one reason they get a pass is due to the fact that the Silicon Valley elite are overwhelmingly liberal and give over 90% of their donations to Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Perhaps that's why few criticize the 21st century robber barons. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Sony Pictures, All Saints, the inspiring story of Pastor Michael Spurlock with John Corbett, now playing rated PG, allsaintsmovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I'm joined by Miss Chelsey Youman and Mr. Kerby Anderson, and we've been talking about the free speech movement, especially as it's being threatened in Berkeley and kind of in that Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal area. And so we just, Chelsey, we just had a judicial ruling that came down, correct?
That's right. I work at First Liberty Institute, and I'm an attorney there, and we have a very really wonderful client. His name is Coach Kennedy, and he is a high school football coach out of Bremerton, Washington. And I'm sure many of our listeners have heard this before, but in case you haven't, he started to practice about 7 years ago, where after a football game, he would just take a kneel on the 50-yard line and just thank the Lord that all the players were safe and that everyone had good sportsmanship, and then he'd leave the field after the football game. And eventually students joined him in the field. Some of them would pray. Sometimes they would just talk. But all that to say that the school actually fired him, and they sent him a letter and said, you have to cease and desist praying after the football game because students can see you. And if you want to pray, you have to go quietly back into the school and into a private area. And he said, no, can't do. I have a right after a football game to pray. All that to say, they fired him, and we sued on behalf of Coach Kennedy, not asking for any financial benefit, but just simply to have him reinstated as a coach. I mean, these kids are his lifeblood, and he loves his job, is very passionate about them. And our case, we went up to the Ninth Circuit, and we got the ruling last week, and the Ninth Circuit essentially said that because he's a teacher and was within plain sight of students and parents, even though his prayer was silent and after a football game, that they would know he was praying. And because of that, it was an Establishment Clause violation, and we lost the lawsuit. And so we're floored. It's one of the most egregious opinions we have on any of our cases we've ever seen. It goes so far. I mean, let's think through the ramifications to say that if you're a teacher, you can't wear the sign of David on around your neck or a cross necklace. You can't wear a yarmulke because you're a teacher and students can see you. So I think it's a really, really egregious decision, and we definitely are going to be pursuing options for whether that's appealing to the Supreme Court or trying to get another decision in Bonk out of the Ninth Circuit.
Kerby, where does this end?
Well, and my concern is there was another case a number of years ago, and you're the lawyer, so you can help us out of Los Angeles, where it said that this particular individual did not have a right to express his opinions because he was an official of the government. So it seems like they're now saying that if you're a coach or you're an administrator or you're a teacher, then you are an official of the government. And so as a result, you can't have any religious views. And so we've all seen this. You've watched sports, Nick, where you have a kid go down and everybody says a silent prayer, or some people cross themselves. That would be totally inappropriate at this point. And I used the joke the other day that Roger Staubach every once in a while would come to the sidelines and have Tom Landry give him the play, but before he did, he'd kind of look up, he'd close his eyes. He was obviously thinking, but he looked like he was praying, And one time Roger Staubach says, I always wondered where all those plays came from. Well, now a coach even looking up like this could be looking like he's praying or getting down on the knee for something. This could go as crazy as you can possibly imagine because, Chelsey, as you point out, you're pretty fair. If an opinion is well argued, you'll admit it's well argued, even if I don't like the conclusion. This is not well argued, is it?
We were a little bit flabbergasted when we got the opinion. And, it is the Ninth Circuit, so we weren't entirely surprised, I should say. But just like the lack of reasoning, we have some Supreme Court precedent on the books that they could have followed. I mean, we definitely have very strong legal constitutional arguments for his rights to do this, that he wasn't in his official capacity at the end of a football game. He could have been a parent. A parent could go on the field and pray. So we were very, very surprised to see just how far they took it, some of the lack of reasoning. They were saying, even though his communication, part of the standard is if your communication is to your boss, then are you acting in your official capacity? Well, his communication was to God, and it was silent, and they tried to skirt around that. So we are very hopeful that we'll be successful on other grounds in this case later. We're definitely not done fighting on behalf of Coach Kennedy.
Yeah, and maybe I know that all of my coaches needed prayer because they had to put up with guys like me. And then the trouble that I would cause either on the basketball court or tennis or football. I didn't play football. I was too small then. And so, this is it's shocking.
It's just amazing.
It's just shocking how we're continuing to see, just from a cultural standpoint, Kerby, we're continuing to see God continually squelched out of the public square.
This is the last gasp, because think about this. There was a case out of Texas a number of years ago out of Santa Fe, and that's where you had prayer before a high school football game. And so the Supreme Court ruled in its inscrutable wisdom that you have to have a separation of prayer and player. Well, that one you could see might be coercive in some way. I don't think it was. But there is nothing coercive about when all the kids are turned the other way. Chelsey, remind me, because they would usually be singing the fight song, so all the kids' backs were turned. You'd have to really be watching to see this one guy go out to the 50-yard line. And even that, which was a silent, solitary act where he did not involve one of the other students, at least the Ninth Circuit Court says was unconstitutional.
That's right. In the Santa Fe case, the difference was that it's what the court called a captive audience. They have a little bit of a higher standard for students and what they're exposed to, because they say, look, these are impressionable minds. Whether we disagree with that or not at First Liberty is really a moot point, because they decided if it's a captive audience and they're young, impressionable students, you have kind of more of a duty to make sure you're not utilizing your position and authority over them to evangelize, which I understand. But this was quantifiably not that. That was absolutely the opposite.
He told them not to come, as a matter of fact, didn't he?
As a matter of fact, he did. It was at the close of the football game. Students and parents were free to disseminate however they wanted. And frankly, there are other religious individuals at the school there's a Buddhist coach who is not in trouble for his religious practice on the field. And so it definitely looks like some religious targeting and discrimination and retaliation for his Christian views.
It's so interesting because, again, I know this is specific to the Ninth Court Circuit Appeal, but we continue to see this just cultural wide. There's just this general movement away from Christianity being entered into the public square, which is just, it's ironic, one, and it's contradictory within itself. It's intellectually dishonest that you would single out one particular religion while you yourself advance your own religion, that being no religion, that being no God, rather, into the public square. And Jim Denison just does a phenomenal job on this. And I don't just say this just because he's writing my paycheck or signing my paycheck, but I think he's documented it very well in the sense that there used to be a day that God and church was central to the culture. That's when Billy Graham was the most admired man. When you had blue laws that were on the books, and you just had this sense that everybody, at least there was this general sense that it was advantageous to be able to go to church, to build those connections, or to be able to connect with God and be refreshed in the week in order that you might go out into the week and bless your community and the world. And then about 20 years ago, then we begin to see religion kind of skirted to the outskirts. You have your way, I have my way, you just kind of move there. And now we're entering into a place where religion, specifically Christianity, is seen as dangerous to the culture now. You've got individuals like Frank Bruni that says you'll be forced to believe relative to the kind of secular sexual ethic. You've got Richard Dawkins that's saying that software is a virus on the that religion is a virus on the software of humanity that must be expunged, that you got Dawkins that said religion poisons everything. There's just this sense of hostility towards religion in the culture, Kerby, that I just don't know what we did.
Yeah. Well, and I think your point that you're making is it went from a time where Christianity was the center of society to this kind of apartheid to now it's the most dangerous part of society. And this ruling, even though it is only one ruling, it's only 3 judges, it is, I think, shows how much more extreme it is. It's one thing back in 1962 to say that mandatory school prayer might be unconstitutional because it might have been forced upon some of the children. It's a very different kind of thing now that you have him saying that we cannot have Christians even share the fact that they're Christians in a valedictorian speech. We can't have a Christian coach going to the 50-yard line. This is more extreme than we've seen even in the last couple of years. And as Chelsey has pointed out before, used to be when you say, I'm working for religious liberty, people go, oh, that's really good. Now they're going, oh, you're one of those, huh?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I went to a recruiting event at SMU looking for legal interns, and you know, when I was at SMU just a few years ago, religious liberty was just like any other. It was the equivalent of saying I do free speech law or, you know, any kind of rights defense. Civil right is still considered a civil right. Mm-hmm. and obviously we do consider it still a civil right. But now people's eyes get big and it's become a dirty word and is now this controversial area of the law. And the truth is that's not the case. And we've even seen the language in the Obama administration shift to, you've all probably heard the words, the right to worship, your right to worship, your house of worship. So that has the connotation that your religious liberty rights are in the 4 walls of your church or your home and not really to go out into public. But the truth is the First Amendment says they're free exercise of religion. And that we as Christians and believers know we don't leave our religion at the door when we go to work. It comes with us. It informs our actions and our other belief systems. So it's something worth protecting. I
completely agree. And so we'd love to hear from you. If you want to add your comment or call in, you can call in at 800-351-1212. And when we come back, we're going to be continuing to talk about free speech. And then specifically, we're going to finally get to the question of, is it beneficial and wise to be able to go into Berkeley? We'll be back.
What difference does it make when you support Point of View? For Lee Weaver and his family, it meant doing something to reach out to women in need, and so far, to help bring nearly 5,000 babies into the world.
As a family, we were sitting around the dinner table. Our older daughter said, Dad, we need to do something about it. And that kind of struck a chord in our family. All of that started out of Point of View and the effect it had on our conversations and our heart, leading us into don't be hearers only, but doers of the word. Point of View has always been real supporters of the concept that we're a small part of.
Your support of Point of View inspires people to do great things. You partner in spreading truth around the world. But the only way to make that happen is for you to make the call or visit us online and join the Truth Team. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Do it now. 800-347-5151 5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And we are back, and I am joined at the round table by Miss Chelsey Youman and Mr. Kerby Anderson. I am Nick Pitts, and so we've been talking about everything from free speech to religious liberty to the Coach Kennedy case that just was handed down by the Ninth Circuit Court. And so we're going to be taking some calls right now. And so we've got Steve from Maine. Steve, are you there?
Yes, hi.
Hey, Steve, what's your point of view?
Well, thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to kind of comment on something that always bothers me about our country and Christians in our country and their belief of the separation of church and state. That is really something that came out in, and I'm not exactly sure, I can't quote the exact case, but in like 1949. And it's, you watch C-SPAN and you watch our House of Representatives and our Congress meet with the opening of with a prayer. And so we're not that far removed from, realizing that there is a higher power in our government. And I'm just shocked that at a lower level in our towns and cities and states that private schools are cracking down so hard on this so rapidly. And it just seems like Christians need to just really stand up together and stand up and start fighting for these rights. Like, forget separation of church and state. It's not even a valid law. And we need to stand up and start fighting for that again.
You know, I can tell you're definitely educated on these issues, and that's so encouraging as a religious liberty attorney to see that you know your rights. And I wish that every American did know those rights and know things that separation of church is nowhere in the Constitution. It's my favorite question to ask liberals instantly because I say, where is it in the Constitution? They have no clue. What they're referring to is the First Amendment that says Congress shall make no law establishing a religion. And that is obviously a state-right religion. And if Congress were passing a law that said everyone had to go to church on Sunday and it's in the Sabbath, that's originally how that was intended to be designed. But it has been taken, a context has been taken over time to just say that, look, government endorsement of religion is the issue, but we are allowed to have religion acknowledged in the public sphere. We're allowed to have chaplains that serve fire stations and chaplains that serve in the legislature and open the legislature with prayer, because there's a long-standing history in our country of recognizing religion plays an important role in many citizens' lives. But it is important also to note that these instances of religious hostility have increased dramatically over the last few years. First Liberty Institute publishes a book called Undeniable every year. And in 2012, it tracks instances of religious hostility, whether that's someone suing someone else for their religious beliefs or being fired, or even just the threat of suit. In 2012, there were 600 instances across America, and last year we published over 1,400 instances. Wow. So that's a very, very big increase, and I'm just really honored that we are able to stand with so many brave men and women of any faith, frankly, that is affected because of their faith.
I might just mention that if you go to the Point of View website and click on the picture of Chelsey, it will take you to First Liberty. And one of the things you might want to purchase is Undeniable, because that is a great resource, because some people think, oh, you guys are just overreacting. It's really not that big a deal. And as you point out, it's like an exponential growth in terms of these religious liberty issues, isn't it?
It is unlike anything we've ever seen. Our president, Keller Shackelford, will say, I've done this 25 years, going on 25 years, and he's never seen it this bad before. So it's definitely a culture shift. But also look on our website. We have a lot of free resources available. If you're a teacher, we outline what you can and can't do in the classroom. If you're a student, what your rights are in the classroom. We have military outline for military rights, workplace rights. Just go on there, look up our cases, and really get educated.
I couldn't agree more. And so it's funny. I've got this little anecdote. So a couple of weeks ago, I was on The Blaze, and I was debating back and forth between an atheist. And so we were talking about religion and public society. And so we went back and forth, and in a shocking, I don't think he knew, it was fun. And so all that to say, he started talking about how even Thomas Jefferson in 1802 with his letter to Danbury, and before he could even finish it, I was like, but then you need to go back all the way to 1646 and to Cotton Mather, and when he started talking about the separation of church and state. But see, right now you're projecting your understanding of separation of church and state, which is really trying to keep the church out of the state. But really, in the original intent, even before the country was founded, was to keep the state out of the church. Right. And you're projecting your current understanding onto the historic narrative, and that just doesn't work, unfortunately. And the beautiful thing of and this is why I love Roger Williams all the way back in 1646, is the illustrative language that he utilized in this letter to Cotton Mather, talking about how there's the church, that's the garden, this beautiful garden, and then you've got the state, which is the wilderness, and it's incumbent upon individuals that are tending the garden to go out into the state and to be able to tend that as well, utilizing the imagery of Genesis 2 of to work the land in order to bring about the goodness. And how we have to be educated within ourselves to be able to understand the role of Christians as they go out into the world. And it's never to be separated, but rather to go into it and to tend to it.
Yeah. And again, Steve uses a good illustration that I think you could use anywhere, and that is whatever the idea of keeping the establishment of religion and what that meant in the First Amendment, that was pushed forward by somebody you've just been reading about James Madison.
Yeah, James Madison.
And the day after James Madison pushed through what was the First Amendment, the next day he established the chaplaincy in the United States Senate. So whatever the establishment of religion meant, we know it didn't mean that you couldn't pray before a legislative event. And so it shows how today our friends, civil libertarian friends, and people for the separation of church and state, and all those other particular groups have completely twisted this whole idea of the separation of church and state, and really did not understand what Thomas Jefferson meant, even when his letter to the Danbury Baptist Association came out in 1802.
It's this understanding, and Chelsey, if I'm wrong, our founders just believed these to be our eternal issues. These were significant issues, and so whether it was the establishment or whether it was the practice of free religion, or whether it was the ability to be able to speak and to speak freely, they understand the significance of these issues, and they gave us that freedom to be able to exchange with one another.
Right. Some of it, too, is a viewpoints differentiation between both sides. I think that if you believe in natural law and kind of natural rights, that these are God-given rights and God-given, God-ordained rights, speech and the right to choose your belief and your truth, and then to speak to those beliefs in truth, then really you're in more of a defensive posture that the government can't infringe on that. But if you're liberal and you're on the other side, a lot of times they think the government gives and takes away my rights, and these aren't unalienable rights after all. And so that's where we get into a little bit of the philosophical differences here. But I would also say that some of the organizations on the other side, they found pretty effective intimidation tactics, because after all, 225 years of jurisprudence is on our side for religious liberty. And what they tend to do is just send these demand letters. And a lot of times they don't even have a threat of suit in them. They just list a random case out of nowhere, Illinois, and they say, oh, this is the precedent in your state of Texas. Not really, but you should back off on this behavior. And if you don't, we might sue you, or we might just embarrass you publicly. And they found it to be a really effective intimidation tactic. And so I think it's so much more important for people to understand I have rights, I can stand by those, and to contact us if they have questions, if they ever get one of those letters.
And where can they contact you?
At firstliberty.org. You can fill in a request for legal help, and we will really help you with almost a lot of things. I shouldn't say anything. Not divorce law. Please don't call us for divorce law. It happens. We cannot help you.
That's so good. Well, let's keep on taking some phone calls. We've got Pam from Georgia. Pam, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you for taking the call.
You're very welcome. What's your point of view, Pam?
All right. Well, speaking of freedom of speech, I was thinking and wondering why, and maybe Chelsey can answer this. There's a man named George Soros who has been funding these thugs that are going around beating people up, and they were at the Wall Street demonstration a few years ago, and he's, as I understand it, been paying them quite a bit of money to go out there and do violence, and he's a billionaire. He came to this country from Hungary. He was in a concentration camp, and he got out, and his fellow Jews that were there with him said that he went after Jews and was cooperating with the Nazis, which, this is something interesting. But since they know that he's doing this, why can't our government investigate him and put a stop to this? Because it would seem that what he's doing is clearly illegal, fomenting violence, and, that's just what I was wondering in view of the fact that they're apparently going around after people who are having rallies or trying to have rallies in support of free speech or whatever they want to do, and they're intimidating people so that what they want to do is to totally wipe out free speech.
So the Supreme Court has actually held that donations of funds is surprisingly, maybe to some of you, a form of speech. That my right to donate to a certain campaign or candidate is a form of expression, and my expressing my support for them and my ability to be a part of a cause that I care deeply about. And so that's absolutely a protected right to donate to whomever you want. Obviously, violence is not a protected right, and so, there's a differentiation there.
And I'm going to use my right to be able to say we will be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. They were sick of a commercialized Christmas. The presence and general distraction from what they believed to be a season meant to remind us of something deeper led Larry Gallo and his family to look for something different. So they left behind the packages and bows to serve the less fortunate in Central America. Larry's girls are physician's assistants, so it was natural for them to take on a medical missions role. Larry, a maintenance engineer, discovered that the kids in line needed some company. So as his daughters provided the medicine, Larry kept the kids happy. So what's the problem? Well, Larry Gallo is better known as Sergeant Larry Gallo. When the U.S. Air Force featured Gallo's story in one of their publications, an atheist group said the article violated the First Amendment. They even alleged that Gallo's story, quote, emboldens our Islamic enemies because we look like crusaders and it enrages our Islamic allies, unquote. They wanted the article taken down. After a quick internet search recently, I discovered that the article in question is still active on an Air Force website, and it should be. The Air Force should never cave to demands of censoring religion from public view. It should never punish those service members who put service over self, even outside the line of duty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Could you lose your career because of your faith? Could your pastor be sued because of his sermons? Can students and teachers be punished because of what they believe about God or what they say? Can the government or even your employer force you to violate your beliefs? Get the answers, and if necessary, legal protection from First Liberty Institutes at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I'm Nick Pitts. I'm joined by Kerby Anderson and Chelsey Youman around the round table. And so to kind of sum up the past, I guess, hour, 50 minutes, we've been talking about everything from Hurricane Harvey and the tragedy that was happening down there, but also just some of the goodness that we're continuing to see. And also talking about some Supreme Court cases, or I guess Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal cases, and this understanding of religious liberty and what's the role of religion in kind of a pluralistic society. And we're going to go ahead and take one more phone call. We've got Ron from Illinois. Ron, are you there?
Yes, I wanted to talk to you. My comment is about what did Jesus say he would find when he came back? What I'm hearing you say is everything that he said. I think it is exactly what he said he would find. And one of the worst things I'm seeing is the latest move right now is to rewrite our history, the history of the United States. Have you heard Google is trying to rewrite everything digitally? They want to take our books and get rid of them and put everything on computer. Why? Because computer information is easily changed. I understand everything you're talking about. You know, what's your comment?
Yeah. So, Ron, you bring up a good point. Like Google probably 10 or 15 years ago started that Google Book program where they really were trying to bring together and scan like almost every book for a certain period of time and try to put that in ebook format. And I know I've benefited from it greatly. Finishing up my research, one of the things it's kind of funny, I would often complain to my boss, Jim Denison, when I was writing research, just saying, there's just so much stuff out there, Jim. There's just so much information. He'd be like, Nick, just imagine not having a computer and having to go to the actual library.
Oh, yes, all the time.
And I got lost in the card catalog. I'm just grateful that there's an electronic system whereby I can look up all this stuff. But I was especially grateful for Google during that time because they had really converted a lot of that stuff to electronic versions.
Frankly, I think that's good because it means that probably a lot of that will not disappear, which some really excellent books over the years are found still in some of these great libraries, but unless you have access to those, and I know, for example, when I was at Yale, you did not have access to the books. You can't go down and pull the book off and say, oh, that would be an interesting read. So in some respects, the old system kind of locked away some really valuable material and information. Even when I go to the Dallas Public Library, yes, I still one of those guys that goes to the library. A lot of the books that I want to get to are in special sections, and you have to have special permission. This digitized into the library, I think, is a good thing. But back to what Ron is talking about, we do have to recognize that we are living in a world where cultural engagement is tougher than it's ever been before. And that's something you've been writing about, isn't it?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're seeing at Google right now is the intolerance of tolerance, I guess you could say. There's just this sense that they want to welcome this environment whereby there's the free exchange of ideas, but if those ideas are contrarian to the majority or contrarian to the leadership, there's almost a squelching of your voice, as we saw 3 weeks ago with the firing of the Google engineer. And I think one of the distressing things is it really inhibits the ability to be able to move forward towards a more perfect union if we can't exchange these ideas, which is traditionally what's made America so great.
Yeah, I think it's so important for us to be able to continue to have, as we said earlier, a dialogue and this exchange of ideas. And I'm hoping that people can still find their conservative resources and their conservative news outlets out there and still select their sources and be able to hear both sides of the equation.
So then let's go this. We've been talking about it. So let's be about it right now. So Ben Shapiro is scheduled. Ben Shapiro, or anyone rather, during the Free Speech Week is set to be able to give a response to conservative ideology, just a conservative speech to advance the conservative cause in Berkeley. And right now we have the mayor that's trying to squelch that voice and say to cancel the speech. They've charged Ben Shapiro $16,000, the organization, simply in security fees to be able to go out. So I want to think about this from a legal standpoint. I understand, like, we don't want to acquiesce. We don't want to succumb to kind of some of these extremist positions. But I'm also trying to think about it from a Christian perspective and a moral perspective of everything might be permissible, but is all things beneficial, right? So help me understand that, Chelsey.
Right. Well, I think it's also, if we're talking in a biblical context, if he was a preacher or someone preaching the gospel, I would say, look at Paul. He was thrown in jail for his beliefs. So, if we were talking about evangelism and really spreading truth and light and love, then that's a little bit different of a calling in conversation than maybe more political speech. Everyone disagrees on this. Me and my husband even go back and forth. I err on the side of go. Let your voice be heard. I would be there. Even, I did a speech at UNT about the same-sex marriage case that was rendered, and I was debating the director of public policy for the ACLU. UNT, by the way, they say rivals Berkeley in liberalism. Wow. I don't know if you've heard that. I've heard that. So it was very intimidating that someone started threatening me in the middle and had to be pulled out by security guards. And that was a small microcosm of what Ben Shapiro would be facing. But I can say that I was able to vocalize views and ideas that these students had never heard before. And they came up to me afterwards and said, I had so many Black students come up and say, thank you for saying that this cause is different than ours. And thank you for differentiating historically and constitutionally why these are two different causes. And so to be able to have those ideas spread, it just meant a lot to everyone, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a really unique opportunity, but it's not necessarily a very simple answer that we find right now, Kerby.
Well, and again, we talk about wise as serpent, innocent as doves, and there are some times when maybe prudence would say, this isn't probably the best place to particular fight that battle. You don't have to die on every hill. But if we never speak out in those hostile arenas, then it becomes back to my favorite line today, the heckler's veto, where if just one of the hecklers says, I got a problem with that, that becomes a veto and you're not allowed to speak. And that's kind of the direction we're heading. If we don't allow the Charles Murrays to speak, we don't let the Milo Yiannopoulos to speak, we don't let the Ben Shapiros to speak anywhere, then in this sense, the other side already is won.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I'm coming down on in Chelsey. So I guess you could say I'm siding with you right now, even though I want to just be adversarial just for the sake of being adversarial. Is that I think it's important that if individuals are going out into these instances, that they act above reproach when they do that. And one of the things that I've really been impressed by what Ben Shapiro has been doing is he has been encouraging those that would come out to be nonviolent, to really just see the ideas for what they are, ideas, and not to be able to I guess you could say what Jesus would say, turn the other cheek. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but should the opportunity present itself that there's violence that begins to take place.
That's right. I think it's an opportunity for conservatives to say we differentiate ourselves from the alt-right. We're separate. We're separate. We have different political views, political histories, and frankly, there's a lot more just mainstream conservatives that are out there that are going to be fine, that are going to be safe. They're not going to be out there wearing, with these KKK banners. That's not our identity. It's not. And so to be able to separate ourselves and say, look, we'll call out equal evils or evils on both sides. And it's an opportunity for us to be really intellectually honest, frankly.
I think that's a great distinction that you made, that there needs to be a distinction made between the alt-right and between conservatism. To be conservative isn't necessarily to be alt-right, but a lot of alt-righters at times do have some vision or some type of conservative beliefs, and there must be that distinction. So it's been quite a show, Kerby.
You've done a very good job as usual.
I'm just trying to keep up with you, Kerby.
Yeah,
I'm
just really good.
Keep up with you.
Great Millennial Roundtable. I'm looking forward to next Wednesday when we do it again, right?
Very much so. Very much so. And so thank you so much for joining us. And so be sure to join back tomorrow. Tomorrow, Kerby, who do you have on? What are you talking about?
We're going to talk about The Heart of a Man, and that is a very new movie that's come out by Noel Boucher, so we're looking forward to that. And we'll be talking about that in the first hour and get into some other items in the news in the second hour. We'll see you then.
You'll have to listen in. See you then.
Would you like to be above average or exceptional? I'll explain how you can be in a moment. What do you think about change? Some people love it, others not so much. I'm guessing you agree our culture needs change, but how will that happen? Change happens with you and your influence. If each of us does our part, God can change the culture through us. That's a goal at Point of View, to help you change things around you. We never charge for the information we deliver each day, but that information is not free. There is a significant cost in getting it to you. You know who helps us do that? About 1 out of every 800 listeners to Point of View. So you can be above average. You can be exceptional by visiting pointofview.net and clicking the banner Change Happens with You, or by calling 1-800-347-5151. Thank you for being exceptional by supporting Point of View. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day.